Hello, it's Pete back again with another film review. First one I've done in quite a while. Hopefully, back doing a few more of these more as we go forward. I've had quite a bit of a break and a few things have happened, so I'm happy to be coming back today reviewing Spider-Man Homecoming, which is, of course, the latest Spider-Man movie, the fifth Spider-Man movie that's been made. And I gave you my thoughts on it, my rating, whether I think you guys should check it out or not. It's been out a while, so chances are a few you probably have already watched it, but this is just my 2 cents on what I thought of it. I have got a really bad throat, so forgive me if I keep drinking a bit of water as we go through. So, Spider-Man Homecoming. Off the top of the review at the start, I'm going to have to give you a quick backstory on my history with Spider-Man, which is I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. I've always loved the character. Ever since I was a little kid, when I used to watch the Spider-Man cartoon on a Saturday morning, and then when I got older, the 90s cartoon, I was a huge fan of that and videoed it all on TV. And then when the Rain movie finally came out, I absolutely lost my mind because I thought that was an excellent, amazing comic book movie, and the second one too was excellent. And to me, they're still the gold standard for comic book movies. Very few of the MCU movies really hit the same heights as those two films for me. So Spider-Man's always been a very, dear character. Unfortunately, the movies that came after Spider-Man 2, namely Spider-Man 3 and the Amazing Spider-Man movies, were not very good. Particularly the first Amazing Spider-Man, I absolutely hated and thought that they completely ruined the character and just driven it off a cliff edge. So I was really not on board with how they rebooted it. Um, Generally because it just felt like the same thing again. It didn't feel like a fresh take, even though they said it was, and they made it all about his parents and messed up the origin. They just did so many things that I just didn't like about it. And even though they made Spider-Man 2, I did like a little bit more. Overall, when I heard they were, knocking it on the head and leaving it, and then now this new arrangement's come along with Marvel, where Marvel are actually helping bring in this version of Spider-Man to the MCU, I'm much more happy with how it's turned out because I've always thought Marvel has a very good um, handling on its characters. I mean, the movies, stories in the Marvel films are always pretty kind of the same thing over and over again. The villains, there's an issue with the villains sometimes being one-dimensional. I like Marvel films, but I appreciate there are some issues with them. But one thing I will say Marvel always gets right is the characters. They know the characters, they know how they should be, and this was so good that they got Spider-Man back because in this movie, right from the start, you can tell there's a pride, but there's also a confidence in knowing who this guy is. They know exactly who Peter Parker should be. Tom Holland's the perfect person to play him. They know how Spider-Man should look. They know what he should do, and you just feel in really safe hands watching this movie. You don't feel like there's no face palming moments where like, what have they done to Spider-Man? Um, and they have changed up quite a few things with this one as well. It has got a different tone to it. It's more like a sort of indie movie feel, which I really liked. It didn't feel like a big budget movie. In some places, it didn't even really feel like a superhero movie. It felt more like a 1980s John Hughes like teen movie, which is what made it really feel quite fresh and really good. It does remind me of a bit of what happened with Batman Begins because at that point there'd been 4 Batman movies already out, and Batman Begins really made you feel like you were watching Batman for the first time in that movie. It wasn't like the other movies really existed because of how confident, how different it was. And this felt very much the same. It felt like, as much as I love the old Spider-Man movies, this one felt like it wasn't in service to those. It felt like it knew that exactly the director knew what tone they wanted. They knew who Spider-Man was, how he should behave, but they also weren't afraid to take it some slightly different places, which makes it a bit more fun. Um, they poked fun at a few funny things in this movie that were genuinely new ideas that we haven't seen in a Spider-Man movie before. Um, like particularly the aspect of how he gets around if there's no buildings around for him to web swing off, like he's just legging it across a field or something, and played on the aspects of him, still being young, getting used to being Spider-Man. There's some quite funny scenes happening there with him, where it just humanises the character a lot. I mean, he doesn't feel like a superpowered character all the time. He does mess up, he does make mistakes and things, and that's what makes him my favourite comic book character of all time because of, at least superhero character, because of how relatable he is like that and the duality he has between his two personas, which sort of Spider-Man on one hand, Peter Parker on the other, and it means quite a lot of the time that one is being shortchanged by the other. I mean, again, it's not really a big spoil, but there are certain scenes where you're aware that he is sacrificing being Parker in order to be Spider-Man. And that's really important they put that in, because in Amazing Spider-Man they tend to forget that aspect. It didn't really feel like he was juggling those two personas that much. It felt just like a straight up Spider-Man movie or straight up Peter Parker movie. It didn't really feel like there was much of a difference between the two characters. And for me, that's always been the appeal of Spider-Man and the way it resonates, because you can always relate to that aspect of a guy trying to manage his life, trying to struggle between different things, work-life balance and all that. And it's something that even as an adult you still, have issues with. So it really has helped Spider-Man, as I've grown up, still relate to it in different ways. And you see it in a different way, of course, because I'm an adult now. And I appreciate this movie isn't made for a 35-year-old man. It's a movie made obviously for teenage kids, but it's good that it works for both those audiences, because of the aspects of it that are very true to the old way of Spider-Man. Like, as much as it brings a lot of cool new things to it, Spider-Man is still Spider-Man. He still looks as right, he behaves right, he has the right one-liners. They haven't done what they did with Amazing Spider-Man, where they just sort of completely messed it up and the costume looked like shit, and it just didn't look or feel like Spider-Man the way it was represented in that movie. It felt like they wanted to make him dark and edgy and show him in shadows and give him little eyes and make it look like the suit had been handmade. It was just not the right take for Spider-Man, in my opinion. It just didn't feel like him. It didn't sound like him. He didn't act like him. So it wasn't Spider-Man, in my opinion. And I think, not everyone agrees. Some people preferred it. But I think overall now, most people have to agree this is the best screen version we've had. Flipping over to the other side, talking about the villain. The villain was also really, really a high point for me, with Michael Keaton playing the Vulture. And the Vulture is not a great Spider-Man villain. In fact, he's one of my least favourite Spider-Man villains. But when you get Michael Keaton in the role of anything, it doesn't matter. It makes me interested, because this is an actor who can make anything work, and he made this work so well. He gave him a proper menace. He gave him a good sort of a grounding. A good little bit of a backstory, so you understood why he was being a villain, which is often the problem with other Marvel villains, is you don't really get inside their head as much. You just kind of go, oh well, they're a villain because this film needs a villain. And the MCU has always focused more on heroes and villains, but I think this one did, again, quite surprisingly, give you a fair bit of screen time with the villain, for you to understand what his motives were and where he was coming from, and made him really relatable. And the menace that sort of Keaton has, the way he plays the character, really comes across very well. And the best scenes were those scenes where he was just being intimidating. He wasn't actually fighting. And the action scenes were probably, if anything, what let the movie down a little bit. They weren't particularly exciting. They felt a little bit flat. I think you could tell that this wasn't a guy who really was an action director. It felt very much like they'd hired this guy probably for the comedy and the characters. And I mean, that's what he did really well, is, like I say, the tone of it was very cool, the sort of indie tone it had in places, and the whole cast were interesting, engaging. It wasn't just Spider-Man and Peter Parker. Like, he had a best friend that was really, really funny and had a lot of good lines. The script was great as well. In general, I thought the script was actually very good. I was a bit worried, because I think the guys who wrote it previously had written some really bad movies, like the reboot they did of National Lampoon. So I was really nervous that this was just going to be a really unfunny Spider-Man movie, a bit like what happened with Ghostbusters, where every 2 minutes they're throwing out jokes and they're just not landing, and it was going to be really, really like a train wreck. But for me, like, almost all the jokes did land. There's not really many that didn't, which is important, obviously, because Spider-Man has to be a funny movie. It's light-hearted. It's not meant to be like super serious, and that film was really, really good, and he worked. It did work well with the rest of the cast. They weren't just one-dimensional characters. They all felt like real characters besides him. So all together, it was a movie that I absolutely loved. Tom Holland as Peter Parker and Spider-Man was absolutely perfect. I couldn't have asked for a better Spider-Man or Peter Parker. Again, they just knew the character so well, but he played it so well as well. So hats off to him. Hats off to Michael Keaton for making a really, really, to be honest, one of the worst Spider-Man villains actually a credible threat. It felt menacing. He felt like he had a purpose, and he felt like he was actually, very relatable in what he was doing, and you understood it a little bit. And also, he had, he has a little connection to Peter in a way, so you can get to him that way. So it's interesting when a villain can do that. I like the aspect that it was more grounded, it was more lo-fi. It wasn't such a big over-the-top spectacle like maybe some of the Avengers movies or Guardians too. It was just more grounded, which is who Spider-Man is, and that's what he is. He is a grounded guy. He's a street-level guy. And again, that was part of the themes of this movie, and him wrestling between, you know, just being a street level friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and wanting to be something better, you know, wanting to be an Avenger and that, and that made it again a little bit different because it wasn't taking on the same origin story with Uncle Ben and all the other stuff. It was actually just trying to do something a bit new and skipped over all the origin because we don't need it. We literally have seen it twice, if not more times. We don't need to see it a third time. So very, very smart what we did with it. Like I say, its only real downside for me was the pacing was a little off in places at first. Got a bit slow to start off with, and the action scenes were a little bit forgettable. There was nothing really great show-stopping about it. They just sort of did the job. They were okay, but they weren't really amazing. They weren't up to the standard of Spider-Man 2 or even Spider-Man 1, but I still feel that's something that can be fixed in the future. And overall, I would take a movie that has a good script, has good characters, has good direction, and good interactions between the characters, and falls down on the action, than have it the other way around, where the action's really good, but the characters suck, the script's terrible. Basically, what you end up is with like a Transformers Michael Bay movie where the action's great and everything else sucks. I know from past experience that doesn't make for good viewing. It makes for just like a terrible 2.5 hours where you just are completely bored because you don't care about what's going on. So overall, I give it 9.5 out of 10. Very, very close to being a 10. Obviously, the lack of action, as I said before, just dragged it down a little. But I put it up there with like Deadpool and similar other superhero movies that are very different and worth checking out. Even more so if you've never seen a Spider-Man movie before. I still think this is a great entry point into the character. I mean, I'm sure everyone who's watched the stream has seen those other ones, but I would highly recommend it if you have or if you haven't. It's getting rave reviews across the board, so I'm pretty sure most people will agree that it's worth checking out. So that's my review for Spider-Man Homecoming. I'm going to do another review soon. I'm going to work my way through all the MCU movies in order as we're coming to the end of Phase 3. Next year, you know, you've got Avengers, Infinity War, sort of, you know, drawing Phases 1, 2 and 3 to a head. It's an interesting time to sort of look back at how it all started with Iron Man and work my way through. So I'm going to be reviewing Iron Man, then Incredible Hulk, and then onwards and onwards through the different Marvel movies. So Iron Man will be the next one I'll be doing. Yeah, so I'll see you again for that. And yeah, it's been good getting back to these reviews again. So hopefully I'll speak to you guys again soon. Bye.